Hello there! Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week, along with special guest Colby Mead, host of the Colby Cast podcast, we'll be doing a deep dive into Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in anticipation for the release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Before we get started, I'm inviting you to join the conversation with us. We can be found on Twitter and Hive at Force Ghost Pod. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok just by searching Force Ghost Conversations. Also, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your listening site of choice. Plus, Force Ghost Conversations is live on Patreon. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Finally, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it's time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, everybody, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, and I'm so thrilled to get into this amazing episode with Colby. I'm so thrilled that he was able to share his insights, his viewpoints, his opinions, and his personal experiences with the film that is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Of course, we are getting ready for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which will come out at the end of June, so we're going through all of the films in anticipation of that major release. So, of course, we are now on the third film in the Indiana Jones franchise to this point, which is The Last Crusade. Of course, we've covered Temple of Doom and Raiders of the Lost Ark in previous episodes, so if you haven't listened to those yet, be sure to check those out. And of course, this is a spoiler conversation that will be on the other side of this break, so if you haven't seen Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, then obviously go check it out. It's on Disney Plus, as well as available on other platforms for digital and physical purchase. So be sure to watch the movie before listening to our wonderful conversation. Of course, I think you'll get a lot more out of it, and it's a wonderful movie, so you certainly won't regret having that opportunity. Before we get into the episode itself, the meat of it on our main segment, let's just cover some of the news that has come out this week in the Star Wars Lucasfilm Galaxy, of course, in our Cloud City Gossip segment. So first, Ahsoka finally has a release date. Yes, the highly anticipated series will be released on Disney Plus starting on August 23rd. So you can rest assured that we will be covering the show in its entirety here on Force Ghost Conversations, as we have with all the other Star Wars shows, canon shows that have come out to this point. And I definitely can't wait for that. I'm so excited for it. And again, sign me up for all the Ahsoka stuff. Everything that I've seen from it is incredible. And I'm hoping that we get some more trailers and announcements as we head into the opening episodes then. And again, we cannot stress enough how cool it is that all of the Indiana Jones films and the Young Indiana Jones Adventures television series are available on Disney Plus. So now is a great time to rewatch the films or to watch them for the first time in anticipation of the new film, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Obviously, as you know, we've been covering them on the podcast here on a weekly basis. So as you can imagine, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is coming just around the corner there. So if you haven't been watching them yet, or if you have watched them, go re-listen back to our previous episodes. I mean, I'm just giving you a heads up as to where we're going with the next couple of weeks here in terms of content, so that you are fully prepared to be engaged in those conversations. So with that, folks, that is all the news that I had compiled for this week's episode. On the other side of the short break, we'll be back with a brand new conversation with Colby Mead, all about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Okay, everyone, welcome back to another installment of Force Ghost Conversations, and I am so thrilled to be continuing our Indiana Jones talk here on the podcast. Of course, you have heard our Raiders of the Lost Ark conversation, our Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom conversation, and now it is time to go to the third film in the Indiana Jones franchise, what was once a concluding film of the Indiana Jones franchise, but has now since become the middle part, if you will, of a 5-part film franchise. We, of course, are here to talk Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I am so thrilled to welcome back to the show returning guest Colby Mead from the Colby Cast. Colby, How are you doing? And welcome back to Forest Ghost Conversations.
Anthony, I'm so happy to be here, and thank you very much for having me back on. I'm so excited to talk about this film.
The pleasure is all mine. And yeah, this is a fantastic film, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts about this movie. And that's really where I want to start at is the beginning of your Indiana Jones kind of journey. And with this particular film, what was it like when you watched this movie for the first time? Did you watch the other films in sequential order? Set the scene for us.
So, I think the most interesting thing for me, anyway, is how I experienced the lead up to this film because I did watch them in sequential order. I
Hmm.
was 14 when this movie came out, and I used to watch a lot of movies. My parents are huge movie lovers, so it just seemed like we were at the movies every week, every
Yeah.
weekend, and especially summertime when the big blockbusters were coming out.
Hmm.
So I don't have any, great story to tell you about seeing this film, but I feel like the story for me is the lead up and becoming an Indiana Jones fan and how I did getting me to this
Hmm.
point. And really, the nutshell is Indiana Jones. Well, Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in 1981. I was 6 years
Hmm.
old. We were out doing a camping trip with a good family friend of ours, and me being the 6 year old on a camping trip, all I wanted to do was sleep outside. I didn't want to be in a tent. I didn't want to
Hmm.
be in a cabin. I want to be outside on this camping trip. Somehow, and I don't have vivid memories of how this happened, but we watched Raiders of the Lost Ark during this camping trip,
Wow.
and I got so scared
Oh, I can
that
imagine.
sleeping outside was crossed off the list real quick. I loved the movie. I was a big
Yeah,
fan. I
you
loved
saw
it.
faces melt outside, and you're like, nope.
And you know what it really did for me, Anthony, was the snakes. I wanted nothing to
Oh,
do with the
interesting. Yeah.
snakes. Yeah, I definitely adopted the indie phobia of snakes that on that trip. So yeah, that was no sleeping outside for Colby in the camping trip. I was really scared of being outside for a while. And then Temple of Doom came out. I was a big fan of that as well. And by that time, I was just into Indiana Jones, especially because of
Mm,
Harrison Ford and his connection to Star Wars, which, like
right.
you, my bread and butter, like just love the Star
For
Wars.
sure. Yes.
So then by the time the last Crusade came out, for me it was exciting. It was supposed to be the conclusion, bringing in the whole dad aspect of things. You sort of had this
Hmm.
idea that we're going to say goodbye to these stories, um, and well, I'm sure we'll get into it, but even the ending of the movie sort of made you feel that way, right? But I
Yeah.
remember watching it at home more than I did in the theaters. Probably
Oh,
recorded it off
interesting.
of a cable channel or something like that. And then I loved just watching this movie over and over again for all the reasons that we're going to get into during our conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. This film has a lot of replay value. I think probably more so than any of the other films because it does have this feel good nature to it, right? I think it
Yeah,
has a little bit of that to add a little bit of Star Wars to it. Does have that Return of the Jedi, good feelings. The good guys win at the end of the day. There's good camp and humor to it. That same kind of tone and vibe. We're coming off of a dark film like Temple of Doom, and then coming back to this one. Uh, it does have those like return to form kind of elements that I think are very fascinating about this movie and this franchise overall.
I agree. Absolutely, I agree. And I wrote down in my notes, and sorry, here's spoiler alert here. Uh, I just think that this is a perfect adventure film
Yes.
in every
Yeah.
sense of the word. And really, whenever somebody says something about a perfect movie, I don't really know what that means. Is there a checklist? I don't know. I have a checklist in my brain, and if it ticks all those boxes, then to me it's perfect. This is a perfect adventure film, and it's
Mm,
for all the reasons you said. It is. It's adventurous. It's fun. It's lighthearted. It does have its thrilling moments. It's stressful and tense, suspenseful type of moments. But really,
yeah.
at the heart of it are Dr. Jones Senior and Dr. Jones Junior. And even if they were the only two people in the movie, I would still love it because they're so great together.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Germany has declared war on the Joneses, as they
Yeah.
say in the movie. And this is fascinating because again, this is the summer of '89, which is, as you mentioned, this came out, which is I've heard stories like this is one of the best summers ever when it comes to films being released. I mean, Batman '89, Ghostbusters 2, I think Lethal Weapon 2, in
Oh,
addition to uh, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I mean, how could you not just be a film fanatic at this point in your life?
And you just named off some of my favorite franchises. You know, I remember going to see Batman '89, and I love that that's what it's called now, Batman '89, because back in those days it was just Batman.
Yeah, it's just
But
Batman. Yeah.
I walked out of school on the last day of school, the first day, really technically of summer vacation. My best friend and I walked right to the movie theater and watched Batman '89. I love the Lethal Weapon movies, and of course Indiana Jones. Yeah, I mean, what a summer!
What a summer indeed. And I'll give you my story for how I watched this film for the first time. So I think our listeners know at this point, as I've told it a few times here, but I only watched the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time when I was 21. Um, and that was in college, and I spent a Saturday night. I rented the Raiders film DVD from our library on campus and said, I've never seen this. I'm going to watch it now. Because my mom had a weird rule about certain films I couldn't watch. It absolutely makes no sense when you think about it. I was able to watch rated R films by myself and with her. It may where she drew the line. It's incomprehensible, right? I was allowed to watch like American Pie films, Saving Private Ryan, all these movies that you would think, a 10-year-old shouldn't be watching, or at least without some sort of parental supervision. I was able to watch willy-nilly. But when it came to like Batman '89, Superman '78, the Indiana Jones franchise, she was like, no, this is where I draw the line. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. So finally, when I was 21 and in college, and I realized I had some independence, I realized that, I can actually watch some of these movies by myself now. So a lot of my early 20s and even up to this point has been me catching up with pop culture that I haven't actually been privy to growing up, like other people have had. They grew up with these when they're kids, or I saw them when they were kids, etc. So that's when I first saw Raiders, and then I graduated that following December. I graduated a semester early for my undergrad degree, and my present to myself was the 4K set, or not the 4K, but the Blu-ray set of the entire Indiana Jones adventures to that point, all 4 films. So
Nice.
I spent like a couple days in sequential order after that, watching Raiders, Temple of Doom for the first time, then Last Crusade, and then Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for the first time. So that's my journey with this movie in a way. It was, I mean, definitely one of the more unique examples of how someone comes to this movie, but
I
I
love
was
it.
hooked from the start. As soon as I watched Raiders that first time, I was like, what have I been doing my entire life not having this franchise in my life? I studied history, for goodness sake. Like I was I was meant to be a historian. I was out, learning how to be a public historian as a craft, and it's where all my first jobs and internships were at historic sites, and that's what I do in my free time for the most part, is go to museums and stuff like that. So like it's definitely within the wheelhouse of what should have been like my favorite franchise to start with.
Right.
But the rest is history. So that's my journey to this point. So we're all square with like how we all arrived at this juncture.
I heard you tell that story to our buddy Craig Dickinson, and I just was cracking up because I'm sure your mom had her reasons. I'm sure she had reasons. Who knows what they were, but I think it's just a great story of how you came to this franchise. Awesome.
My summation is that I think she loves these movies deep down. I think, or she hates them, one way or the other. She either loves them or absolutely hates them. Like she never wanted to watch it again, perhaps, if she hated it, and that's why she didn't want me watching it, because then she'd have to realize that it's kind of on a loop in her house. But she doesn't like Star Wars too much. I'll but my uncle showed me that. So that's how I got into that, and then it was too late once you've already opened Pandora's box. It's too
Right.
late on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know one of her favorite, if not her favorite movie, is Batman '89. We had that VHS, and that's how like this all started. Was I'd pull that off like our stack of movies, and I'd be like, "Hey, can we watch this? This looks cool." And she'd be like, "No, put that back." She didn't want me to ruin it. I don't think. Because I have a tendency of doing that. Like I will make fun of things I see in a loving way, but
Sure.
others may take it as like, "Why are you criticizing every little piece of this movie?" But I do it in a fun, loving manner, and I think I'm a little bit of an acquired taste when it comes to that. But I think she just wanted to protect herself and her memories of watching that movie without me interjecting into that. So that's probably where some of this comes to play here. But honestly, she's never answered the Indiana Jones question. But it's
Interesting.
revisionist history. She will tell you it never happened. So
You've cooked it all
I don't
up
know.
yourself. It's a big conspiracy.
I'd be like, sure, Mom, I didn't watch this on my own accord. But yeah, so what I've learned in my like going back and like learning more about this franchise and what people have thought about it over the years is that in the time in which it was released, some fans found the Temple of Doom, the second film in this franchise, to be quite divisive. Some found it to be too dark and went too far in some places, etc. I mean, it helped create a PG-13 rating, to be honest. So it did it did, for better or for worse, have its say in the film history and canon of it all. But in your opinion, is The Last Crusade then kind of a course correction for the franchise from that point to this one?
So I've got two answers, and I find myself doing this a lot when I talk about older movies. I answer it from my younger perspective and then my older perspective. I
Hmm.
had no idea Temple of Doom was divisive when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
had no
Yeah,
idea.
the internet didn't exist. You didn't know
Yeah,
that.
and I mean, in my circle of friends, we were all about it. You know, it was another Indiana Jones adventure. But when you do see it as an adult, you do see it through different eyes. It's very dark. It is very dark. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about some very heavy themes and some very graphic images, and
Oh,
um,
oh yeah.
but even then, I was not aware that this was a divisive film until was well into my 40s, and I believe it. Definitely believe it. I didn't
Hmm.
experience it, but that doesn't mean that that didn't happen. And with that said, I do think that this is a course correction because the Last Crusade is a 180 compared
Yeah. Yeah.
to Temple of Doom, right? You literally have silly things going on in the Last Crusade,
Hmm.
and they're all fun. They're great. Don't take silly as a bad thing. It's a great thing.
Never.
um there wasn't a lot of silliness in Temple of Doom. So yeah, you look at Raiders and again, adventure, fun, lighthearted. Of course you've got people's faces melting and stuff. That's definitely dark. But there was more fun than darkness, and I think Temple of Doom was the opposite of that. So the Last Crusade, I'm on board with it being a course correction. And again, sort of looking at it the way I looked at it at the time, thinking that this was going to be our last adventure with Indy.
Hmm.
Although I never explicitly remember them saying, "Oh, this is the last one." It's just when you watched it, you're like, "This is perfect. This is just a great ending. If we never
Yeah.
get another Indy movie, this is a great place to leave it." And I'm personally very glad we're getting more Indy. I'm a fan of Crystal Skull, but yeah, course correction. I'm on board with that.
Yeah, definitely. Riding off in the sunset is a great way to end any film, whether it be the end of a trilogy or just the third installment of a franchise. It does work to have a nice chapter end,
It
if you
sure
will.
does. Absolutely.
I think it's an interesting conversation about the course correction of it. And it's interesting because sure, I think there were some critical and fan backlash just to whatever degree that it could at the time, whether it be people writing letters to Lucasfilm or whatever. um, But the interesting thing is that when you watch like the behind the scenes information, it's clear that both Lucas and Spielberg themselves didn't like Temple of Doom.
Mm.
They're very candid about that. They're
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, it's not my favorite."
Yeah.
So they took some time off, right? This is a film that's 5 years later
Yep.
from the Temple of Doom, and in order for them to come back to this franchise, I think they had to go back to a bit of the roots
Yeah.
to make themselves want to come back to it again, to have fun again with this franchise, knowing that it's their last kind of hurrah with this. Because Spielberg, in his mind at this point, too, from his experiences, like from what I know from the Spielberg documentary that's on HBO, it's wonderful, and just some other material that I've caught of his over the years, that he's looking to do other things in his career post 89. Like 89 and 90 are really a threshold moment in his career where he's like, I want to do more mature films, right? The Schindler's List, the Saving Private Ryan's,
Yep.
the Minority Reports, the stuff that he does in like that second sphere of his career, as opposed to your Raiders of the Lost Arks, your ETs, your Close Encounters of the Third Kinds, your more family friendly adventures, if you will, that he was probably most known for at the time. And he just wanted to dip his toes into different waters. And if he's coming back to this, he wants to do the things that were fun, right? Bring back characters, Sala, bring back
Yeah.
Brody, bring in the original James Bond himself, right? And have this fun last grand adventure. So I think it's a little bit of a course correction, but from who? I think it's more mandated from the filmmakers to be a course correction rather than
Right.
a push from the fan base itself, if in my opinion. Um, so I think that's kind of where I'm at this point, and frankly, I think it works as a trilogy and as a quadruple film set when you expand the film, and I'm excited to see where the fifth one takes it to at this point. But that's kind of where I rest on that point there.
And I had also heard, I believe it was in a podcast, and I think it was the Inside Star Wars podcast. It's an excellent podcast, but he
Mhm.
goes into a lot. The host goes into a lot of George Lucas's life, because I mean, how
Yeah.
much it informs Star Wars franchise. Um, and if I'm not mistaken, it was on that podcast that I heard the story that Spielberg and George Lucas had recently gone through divorces,
Oh yes,
and
yes,
in the
yes.
lead up to this movie, and how those real life experiences really informed the movies in that time period. And if you look at Empire Strikes Back, that's much more mature, much
Hmm.
darker than the original Star Wars. And then again, a Temple of Doom. So it makes a lot of sense for these human beings that are creating these stories to have their real life experiences reflected in their films. And it seems like they all came out, okay. And I think it's a interesting observation that you make of 89, 90, because yeah, you do see Steven Spielberg especially, coming away from the whimsical and going much more into the real world type of
Yes.
heavy, mature stories. So really interesting point there.
Yeah. So it's speaking of the whimsical, the film starts off with an incredible sequence featuring, if you will, Indy's first adventure. What do you make of this story technique to explain his backstory, and did it really need to be explained to begin with?
I think this is such a good question, and I put a lot of thought into it while I was rewatching this. And I really have two answers. The first one is, I think the only thing they needed to do with this beginning, and they accomplished it, was set up the dynamic between Dr. Jones Sr. and Dr. Jones Jr. And they did that
Yes. Yeah.
in what, 15 seconds? And
If that.
yeah, exactly. Maybe not even 15 seconds. The other thing that I think really drove the idea behind this particular opening was the filmmakers sitting in a room going, how do we get River Phoenix in this movie? We need to
Yeah.
find a way to get this, because he was an absolute juggernaut at this time. He was on all the covers of the teen magazines, and he was
Mhm.
just burning up the popularity meter. And what blockbuster film wouldn't jump at the chance of getting this kid in their film? I'll bet you, this movie made close to $500 million. I'll bet you 20-25 million dollars of that money were just people showing up to watch River Phoenix and being happy when they did. um,
I agree.
so those two things, that the River Phoenix aspect of it, and then just setting up that dynamic between dad and son. But you know so beyond that, though, it's so much fun. It's such a
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
way to start this adventure film with a really fun, what is it, 10 minutes long maybe? Uh
It's a good chunk of the
it
movie,
is.
I'll be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got, I love the bait and switches, right? The very first thing you see are some people on horses going through mountain ranges, and those horses end up being basically Boy Scouts, right?
Yes.
And then you get this young kid going down into these mines, and we know this is an Indiana Jones movie. We haven't seen
Mm.
Indiana Jones yet. I remember going and not knowing that this is how it was going to start. I didn't know that River Phoenix was going to be young Indy, so I'm just looking at this at face value. And then they look down into this mine, and you see the fedora, and you see the leather jacket, but from behind. So you're like, "Oh, there's Indy," and you turn around, and it's not Indy. So we're sitting there going,
Nope.
"Hold on, what, the bait and switch right off the bat?" They're just like, "Okay, what's going on here?" It it's just, and then we just go into this great adventure of him. This belongs in a museum. From the
Mhm.
beginning, he's such a young kid, gets that gold cross, and he's tearing off on the horse. Then the whole train sequence and all the different animals. He gets away and gets back to the house, and he gets double crossed, right, by the sheriff. And you even get to see him get the scar on the chin with the whip.
Mhm.
Just so there's a great amount of fan service to it, and adventure and fun. So needed. I love the fact that you asked that. Was it needed? I think the only thing that was needed was that dynamic to set up between father and son, but I'm so glad that it happened because it's such a great opening sequence to a movie.
Agreed. I would argue for a yes and that it is needed as well because it allows for more stories to be told.
Yes, that's true.
And it's a great backdoor pilot, if you will, for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and now called Adventures if you watch it on Disney Plus. That again, you can watch it now on Disney Plus if you
Yep.
want all 22 episodes of that, which I haven't seen them before. That now I get to experience those, which it's probably the most George Lucas thing ever, if you will, right? Like a prequel that inspires more
Yeah.
prequels. Like I don't think that was Steven's idea when you come to think of it, but that's totally has George written on all over it there. That's his hand stamp for sure.
George Lucas's DNA is to jump 5 years in ahead of time, or let's leave a big gap in the middle of something and here and there, and we can go back and fill it in if we want to. He's a genius.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on your perspective of do you want to
Yeah,
know things? And some people are like, yeah, I don't want to know. But I guess I am of the person that I don't mind knowing things. I love history, as I've said before. I love knowing how we got to places, right?
I do
Those are the
too.
stories that I want to know about and hear about. And uh if Indy had a fun adventure in Cairo when he was 7, tell me about it, right? If he had a fun adventure in Utah in 1912, whenever that this first, I think it's
Yeah.
1912, when that takes place, then absolutely tell me if that's how he got his scar, if that's how he became afraid of snakes and had this fun adventure on a train sequence too, which I believe is how Spielberg first got his love of film. Was he saw like a film from the 1950s that involved a circus train sequence, which I believe is showcased in the recent film The Fablemans. If anyone gets a chance to see that, which I highly recommend too. Um, it's really them just playing with their fun influences and George exploring this idea of what can a prequel look like and using that as a springboard for other storytelling. You really see these guys really at their coming to fruition with who they are and accepting it in many ways. These creators, Lucas and Spielberg, which I love and appreciate from this sequence. So I think it is absolutely needed and necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, these are masters at the top of their craft, and that and the way the Indiana Jones franchise is structured, uh, you after the end of each movie, you don't need another movie because these are individual adventures that this person goes on, there's no other films it has to set up. And I'm a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it's genius storytelling. I admire all the work it goes into, and now Star Wars from the beginning has been this massive galaxy where the storytelling potential is
Hmm.
infinite. But there's something quaint and wonderful about the Indiana Jones films that you don't need to do that because we're looking at a one-off adventure, and it's incredibly entertaining. And if we don't get any more of that, you're still satisfied because of what you got.
Agreed. You said it perfectly there. And for this adventure, the MacGuffin is none other than the Holy Grail. What do you make of the Holy Grail as being the quote unquote MacGuffin for this particular adventure? And where does it rank, in your opinion, against the other objects of discovery? That being I guess you can include the fertility idol, the the Ark of the Covenant, the Shikara stones, and the Crystal Skull.
Well, the Holy Grail is the Holy Grail, right? I mean, there's a reason that
Yeah.
it's in the zeitgeist as X fill in the blank is the Holy Grail of whatever it is that you're talking about. So right off the bat, the stakes are extremely high, right? Because this is the
Hmm.
Holy Grail. Even if you have no perception or understanding of what the actual item is, the cup of Christ, you don't really need to know. You just know that it's very important. Then as the
Yeah.
movie goes on, I just love how they develop it into this lifelong commitment, borderline obsession for Henry Jones Sr., and how he spent his life creating this diary, how he's able to find it, where he needs to go, and everything that has gone into that. I mean, he's literally working on it in that opening scene when young Indy
Hmm.
bursts in the room, right? He's working on one of the three riddle type of things, booby traps. And
Yeah.
this it makes sense because this is an artifact that has been around for 2000 years. I mean,
Hmm.
depending on your religious affiliation and the way you work your faith, this was the hand of God was holding this and drank from it. So
Sure.
Definitely
Yeah.
a holy item. I think for me, where it falls in, it's going to be right there with the Ark of the Covenant because you have all those sort of same. Although the Ark of the Covenant is from the Jewish tradition, Hebrew tradition, and the Holy Grail would be a Christian tradition, they're still hand in hand.
Oh
They go
yeah.
walking together, right? So
Hmm.
and especially that spiritual aspect of things. And I'm always a big fan of when you're able to fold in the spiritual significance of something
Sure.
into a story. That's always very effective. I'm a big fan of the Crystal Skull just because I do also love outer space and alien
Yeah. It
stuff.
works.
Um, and the stones that he's after in the Temple of Doom, of course, is a prequel, and it's more important to that storyline. But I'm a big fan of the Holy Grail as well as the Ark of the Covenant, just because of the large impact that it holds, and the fact that the Nazis are after both items, because we
Hmm.
also do know that they were the Nazis in real life. There's a historical basis for why they would be after these types of
Oh yeah.
articles or artifacts, I should say. So, yeah, I mean, I basically wrote my notes for this as the Holy Grail. It's the Holy Grail. It's the thing that like historians and architects, archaeologists and whatnot. If they ever found this thing, it would be an amazing event. So yeah, it's the Holy
Yeah.
Grail.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've got it downstairs. I should have brought it up for this recording, but I have a replica that Disney had on
Oh,
sale
that's
a
great.
couple months ago, and I was like, I can't pass this up. I need to have the Cup of
Can I
Christ. You
ask
know,
you,
the search for the Cup of Christ is the search of divine in all of
does
us.
it light up from the inside? Because it's one of the things.
No, it
Oh,
doesn't.
that's a missed opportunity. That would have been
It
awesome.
really is. It's really just the replica of the cup itself. It isn't much more beyond that. It's a nice decorative display. It goes right beside my willow wand,
Nice.
my little Lucasfilm library of collectible replicas I've got
Love it.
downstairs. Uh, but I think for me, it's my favorite of all the stuff. Um, Again, you've talked on a good amount of the spiritual significance of it for those that are of the Christian faith. I think you can't not have the cup of Christ. I mean, every time you have communion, you have to think
Yeah.
about it. um, and I think for me too, I think you're a big fan of storytelling, but the Arthurian myth of it all is something that has really permeated into every legend and
Yeah.
culture that exists in the world today. So whether you're a Christian, whether you're Hebrew, you know, you follow other religions, I think everyone knows about the Holy Grail or the quest for or what it means, right? It's like it's a common phrase to say like, okay, that's the Holy Grail. That's like if I get to that, that's I've achieved everything in my
Mhm.
life, right? The idea of this quest for something, the search for something greater, the search for something beyond, and for each of us, that's for us to determine to set that goal for, right? To set your strategy in order to meet whatever that end goal is. Um, so I think that's the relatable thing
Mhm.
about the quest for the Holy Grail, and of course, I love that this movie is called The Last Crusade. It brings the Crusades into this as
Yep.
well, which is an incredible historical event. So just adding all that into this film, plus yeah, continuing the saga between Indiana Jones and the Nazis,
Mhm.
um, it's just a great way, I think, to conclude what this was at the time. And I couldn't think of a better religious artifact that Indiana Jones could hunt at this point in time. So I think the Grail is really the pinnacle of what this franchise can offer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree, and it's because of that worldwide historical significance of it. You look at the first thing we see that he's chasing after in the movie is the cross of Coronado. It's a cross. It's an artifact. It's someone that as a historical person possessed that at one point, and he's right.
Hmm.
It should be in a museum, but we're not talking about it. It doesn't have power. There's no power there, and they never
Right,
claim that it
right.
does. But the Holy Grail, not only is it an artifact of historical significance, but in the film, this thing has power. There's a power behind it, and that's why the Nazis are
Agreed.
after it, and that adds a whole other element for us as fans.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump ahead on some of our questions here, just for the two of us here. Um, One of the best things about this movie for me is that we're reunited with both Sala and Marcus, but we're also introduced to a big player already, as you mentioned in that opening scene. But we just hear his voice; we don't see him, but we do get to see later Indy's father, who's played by none other than Sean Connery, the original James Bond. And in your opinion, or if this isn't in your opinion, let me know. But was he the perfect casting for Henry Jones Sr.?
Yes, yeah, that and that's
Yeah.
uh,
That's it. That's it. Just yes.
yes, yeah.
Period.
Next question. I This was the first movie that I really experienced Sean Connery as a performer.
Mm.
The James Bond that was around for me in my childhood was Roger Moore, and
I'm sorry, you didn't pop on Never Say Never Again?
I mean, I probably saw bits and pieces here and there, but, I was a teenager, I wasn't really all into watching anything before 1977, if I'm being honest, unless it was
Mhm.
Jaws or
Mhm.
Rocky. Um,
Fair. Yeah.
so, I knew he was there, I knew people had the opinion that he was better, than Roger Moore or the best Bond. I think there was only 2 at that point anyway.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
so I knew about him, but I didn't have any real emotional investment in his performances. But this really was my first experience with him as an actor, and
Mhm.
I don't know. I feel really lucky that that's the case because he just absolutely kills this role. I
Agreed.
think he's the perfect foil for Indiana Jones. Like he is not only is Sean Connery the perfect casting for this role, but this character is the perfect foil for Indy. He's just, I'll go ahead and lob it back to you just based on that, so you can guide us where we're going to talk about because I could literally just ramble on for probably 10 minutes about Henry Jones Sr.
No, I think Henry Jones Sr. is brilliant too, and of course it gets at the like when they created this idea of Indiana Jones when they were celebrating Star Wars and Close Encounters on that fateful beach in Hawaii, where Spielberg is like, I want to do an Indiana, not a, I want to, I want to do a James Bond
Yeah,
picture, right? I've been trying to get the Broccolis to let me do that, and then George Lucas is like, I got a better idea. I got Indiana Smith, an archaeologist, and the idea of this him wanting to do this kind of different James Bond kind of approach to a film, which of course molded itself into Indiana Jones. The fact that they're kind of going full circle again
yeah.
is really cool to me, and I love that it's just a fun Easter egg, but also Connery doesn't phone in this performance at all. He phones in, I would argue, some of those later uh, uh, Bond roles, and we were talking like Diamonds Are Forever, some of those later ones where he's clearly checked out a little bit, in my opinion. And he's definitely giving 110%. You watch the behind the scenes stuff; he's all on board with the production of this movie, the theories behind it, the fun and action of all of it. Um, and I think again, you said it. He's a great foil to Indiana Jones, Henry Jones Jr. He knows the buttons to push, and it's beautiful to see just a father son just recreate regrow their admiration, respect, and love for each other over the course of this movie. Because that's honestly, there really isn't a big arc in any other Indiana Jones
Mhm.
film, if you ask me.
Sure. Yeah, I'm on
There's
board with it.
a clear
Yeah.
arc from like you start at point A, you end at point B, and that's the relationship of father and son.
Yeah.
Right? They don't want to speak to each other
No.
at the beginning of the
Yeah.
movie, and they haven't spoken for like 20
Yeah.
years, and then they're inseparable.
It's just so
It's
heartwarming. It
magical.
is. It is magical. It's just so heartwarming to see their first couple scenes together compared to the scene on the cliff, right when
Hmm. Yeah.
Marcus and
Oh my
Sala
gosh, I love it.
and Dr. Jones are looking over, and Sean Connery's emotions that he expresses through his face and the reactions, where he thinks he just lost
Oh,
his
it's so
son,
good.
and then then of course Harrison comes into frame, and he's just looking right, and he's nodding his head like who knows what's going through any of the guys' minds at this point. But then the change in Sean Connery towards Harrison Ford, he immediately just wraps his arms around him. He said, "I thought I lost you, boy." And the way he delivers that, because he calls him boy through the whole movie, and it just
Yeah.
grates Indy, right? He just hates it, right? He calls him junior and boy. But when he gave him that hug and said, "I thought I'd lost your boy," and then Indy responds back, "I thought you had too, sir." Right? Just there's so much
Hmm.
weight and emotion in those words from both actors, and that really shows you. And that's not even, I don't really know when the third act of this movie starts, so I'm just gonna, for our
Who
purposes,
knows? It doesn't matter.
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna say that this is the last scene of the second act, because then they go to,
Hmm.
where they find the Grail. But um, for that to be the last thing that happens before they conclude their adventure, it puts them right where they need to be for that final act. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
distance that those two characters had traveled from the beginning of this movie till now was just, I mean, it is, that's why I think it's a perfect adventure film. It is just incredible. um and another
Absolutely.
thing that I'd love to bring up about Sean Connery and
Yeah. Go ahead.
I love that he is not incompetent. He's just out of his element, right?
Hmm.
he's
Hmm.
he's
Certainly. Yeah.
he is a genius. He is quick as a whip, and he is providing valuable information to further their quest.
Hmm.
Right now, he's not going to be able to escape on a motorcycle. He's not going to be able to punch his way out of things. That's what Indy's for. But
Yeah. He's not punching his way out of that
no,
tank.
no, but he got that flock of birds to start flying and saved him from that
He
airplane,
sure
right?
did.
And
Yep.
right, and that's another thing that I just love, and it's very subtle, because you could definitely have the temptation to write this character as a buffoon to make him laugh. But
You
he's not
could.
a punchline.
Absolutely.
He's not a punchline in this. He is a very important element to this entire adventure. And he just kills it. Sean Connery just kills it.
I love that you brought that up because that is so so right. He is out of his element, but he adapts
Definitely.
more so than
Yeah.
anybody, right? You're so right. He throws out a great point, right? He explains to Indy why they need to go get the diary, right? Why it's still important. He he takes out a whole plane with
With an
birds,
umbrella.
like with an umbrella. Like, oh my gosh, what quick thinking! Indy doesn't have a plan, but his dad's like, "Oh, I'll take care of this. Don't worry."
I,
And that's really, the lineage is there,
yes.
right? Indy's just has more confidence because he's done these things before, but the quick
Yeah.
wittedness, the thinking on your feet, the quest for knowledge, that all comes from his father
Yeah.
at the end of
Yeah.
the day, which we saw instilled in him as a
Yeah.
kid.
Absolutely right.
Well, this is a great transition to go to our last question here, Colby. And we talked a little about the father and the son relationship, and I know you're a
Yeah.
father, and I wanted to pick your brain about this. I think we all know and appreciate again that the true search for the Grail is the rediscovery of Indy's relationship with his father. And as a parent yourself, how does this theme and film overall, in fact, resonate with you? Has this changed over the years? Feel free to let me know what you're all thinking here.
But it has definitely changed over the years. And as you're asking the question, I just, reflected back to the thing I said earlier, which was, I feel like I answer questions from the younger Colby and the current Colby.
Yeah.
So
I like that approach. That's a good. I like that.
I guess that's what happens when you get old, Anthony. um,
Happens to all of us.
the 14-year-old Colby that watched this late 80s, early 90s, he looked through Junior's eyes. He
Yeah.
understood Junior's frustrations. And now, being a father myself of two young gentlemen, because they're in their 20s, in their early 20s, I think one of the things that stands out to me most now about the movie is how uh, Dr. Jones Sr. He gets to a point where he lets Indiana Jones be Indiana Jones,
Hmm.
right? And you see it in the one of the very last things that you see is when, in that brilliant scene, when Indy, when the Dr. Schneider is her name, I think,
Yes, yeah,
Elsa,
Elsa.
Elsa.
Yep.
She's trying to walk away with the Grail, and the knight had told them it can't pass the seal.
Can't go beyond the
And
seal.
she
Yep.
does, and then the earthquake starts, and the thing cracks open. The Grail falls down. She jumps in after it, or she falls down, and Indiana's holding her, and she's like, I can reach it, I can reach it," and she ends up falling to her death, and then immediately now we have Indiana Jones in her spot being held by his father. And he is
Mm,
tempted by the same thing. I can reach it. I can reach it. And that's when Dr. Jones Sr. says, Indiana. And that to me is where you really, he shows that character has accepted his son for who he is, because he doesn't
mm,
call him Indiana except for that time. Only boy, only junior, and frustrates the heck out of Indy. But in that moment, he really wants to get serious and he calls him Indiana.
yeah.
And I think that's a very big step for Sean Connery's character. He lets Indiana be himself so he can say let it go, and then Indy
Mm,
knows. That doesn't happen unless Dr. Jones Sr. comes to that point where he's going to let Indiana be Indiana. And I think from my perspective as a dad, one of the things that you have to come to terms with is letting your kids be themselves. Be
yeah.
because that's what we wanted our parents to do for us, right? So
Mm.
you can watch them, you can look at them making their decisions, and you can say, I would do this differently, but they're going to do what they're going to do. And as a father, you have to trust that that's going to be the right thing. And if it wasn't the right thing, you have to pray that they learn from it.
For sure. Oh, wow. Colby, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your views and your insights about this movie, about how it's changed for you over the years, about how it's impacted you as both a son yourself and as a father now, and for sharing both young Colby and older Colby's viewpoints and how they've changed throughout the years on this particular film and the Indiana Jones franchise. Where can the fine folks find you and find your podcast online? Feel free to plug anything you'd like at this
Oh,
time.
thank you very much, Anthony. I really do appreciate the invite back. I love talking to you. I love our conversations. You have a wonderful podcast, and I love what you're doing for the people out there that listen to it, and I hope that more and more people do so, so we can live that dream and be professional podcasters talking to our friends, right?
I know.
um,
One day it's going to happen.
my attempt at that is called the Colby Cast, as you mentioned, and I do spend a lot of time talking to my two 20-year-old sons, and we talk about all kinds of things. We love talking about Star Wars and Marvel. We just did a episode about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. We've talked about John Wick, so we talk about all kinds of movies, TV shows, pop culture stuff. We do some episodes about music because we all love music. So really, it's just
Absolutely. Yep.
a chance for the three of us to sit down and talk. And sometimes they like to goof on me because I'm old and they're young, and I love that. I think that that's great, and we record it and put it out for everybody to listen to. So yeah, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at the Colby Cast. So thanks again. I appreciate it, Anthony.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Thanks again for coming on the show, Colby. And for those of you at home, thanks for listening. Of course, we'll be back next week to discuss The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the last film for now until June 30th in the Indiana Jones franchise. So we're gearing up for the Dial of Destiny just around the corner, folks. So we'll be back very soon in your podcast feed. So stay tuned for that. Until then, may the force be with you. Take care.